Hello, good evening. My name is Lapsang Solaka, Board of Director at the Columbia University in Washington, D.C. I'm a U.S. Army veteran and also a Doctor of Law and Policies candidate at the Northeastern University. Currently, I live in New York City. Pretty soon moving back to D.C. once the life is normal. And today is my honor to welcome and introduce panelists from different agencies and different professional background. And our first panelist is Ms. Asha Castleberry-Hernandez, a senior advisor to the Assistant Secretary at the Department of State. She previously served as a Kuwait desk officer at the U.S. Army Central. She worked on the security cooperations with the OMC and the Kuwait Ministry of Defense. In addition, Asha served as a senior key leadership engagement officer for Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve in Iraq and Kuwait. During the Obama administration, she served at the U.S. mission at the United Nations working peacekeeping operation in African continent. Currently, Asha is a major in the U.S. Army Reserve. Furthermore, Asha is a former university professor teaching as U.S. foreign policy, international affairs, and U.S. national security. She is a graduate of Hampton University and holds a master's in international affairs at the Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. Our next panelist is Ms. Deborah Rosenblum, currently serves as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Program. In this capacity, she is the principal advisor to the Secretary, Deputy Secretary, and Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisitions and Sustainment on nuclear energy, nuclear weapons, and chemical biological defense. Prior to her position as Assistant Secretary of Defense, she was the Executive Vice President at the Nuclear Threat Initiative. Rosenblum has served on the board of Herbert Chevrolet Jr. Peace Fellowship since 2012. From 2017 to 2018, she served as an N-Square Fellow focused on driving innovations in the nuclear field. Now she currently serves as advisor to the fellowship program. She holds a master's degree from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs and is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate with a bachelor's degree from Middleview College. She is fluent in French. Mr. Ed Gresser is the former Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Trade Policy and Economic. The Office of Trade Policy and Economic is responsible for USTR's economic research, oversees the use of trade data, produces the National Trade Estimates Report, manages the Trade Policy Staff Committee interagency process, and implements the Generalized System of Reference Program. Mr. Gresser also represents USTR at the board meeting of Millennial Challenge Corporations called MCC. Mr. Gresser joined USTR in 2015 as Policy Planning Director. After 14 years as a nonprofit researcher and trade policy scholar, was named Assistant USTR in 2016. Mr. Gresser is a graduate of Stanford University and holds a master's degree in international public affairs from the Columbia University. He recently moved to a new position, and it's my best of luck and good luck to Mr. Ed for the new career. Our last panelist of the day is Juan Palacio, is the Special Assistant to the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness at the Pentagon. One assists with the force readiness, total force management, health affairs, force management, health affairs, National Guard and Reserve component affairs, education training, and military and civilian personnel, requirement and management, including equal opportunity, moral welfare, recreation, and quality of life matters. She founded the Women, Veterans, and Families Network. Wong is the chair of the Veterans Roundtable at the CFA Society, New York, and co-lead of Women Veterans on Wall Street, a subcommittee of veterans on Wall Street. Wong is adjunct associate faculty of MS in Human Capital Management Program and Alumni Advisory Council member at the School of Professional Studies, Columbia University. She is a graduate of Columbia University School of Professional Studies, SBS, earning an MS in Nonprofit Management. And today's our moderator is Mr. Alex, and he's a board of director of the Columbia University, Washington, DC, and he comes with a very rich background. He's a veteran of Foreign Service Officer, 27 years, and then he was also civil servant for over decades. So, Mr. Ellis, take it away from here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lobsang. Everybody can call me Alex, although if you want to use Mr., it's Leibowitz. Anyway, we do have a very diverse and distinguished group of panelists here, and I think we're very fortunate in having them to provide us with a sort of nice and interesting background on where we stand in some of these important security issues at the beginning of the Biden administration. I wonder, to start off, because we have such a diverse group, if each of you could take a few minutes to describe your own background and how it prepared you for your current role, or in the case of Ed, his most recent role in the U.S. government, and what in particular, maybe if you think it's relevant, what you learned at Columbia that you thought was particularly relevant to your jobs now. And maybe then you could also tell us a little bit about the issues that you're dealing with, what you're devoting most of your time and energy to these days, and how that fits into the overall goals of the Biden administration in foreign affairs, national security, and related issues like trade and so on, trade, technology, and that sort of thing. So without further ado, let's start with our panelists. And since we had since they were named in that order, I'm not sure why, but anyway, let's start with Asha. Asha, do you want to lead this off? We'd be very grateful.
Sure, and I hope I answer all your questions. But thank you so much.
Well, we're not pressing you. Nobody's going to be, but the extent you can and how you think you could best explain yourself, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm so excited to come back to my alumni to talk about my career trajectory, especially when it involves what I do with the Biden-Harris administration. So why is it so applicable as far as what I did as a student at Columbia to where it applies now? It's so obvious. When I was at Columbia CIPA, my regional focus is the Middle East region. And so what was the kind of information that I picked up that helped me now as a professional working at the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs, also known as Middle East North Africa, is that CIPA helped me understand the landscape, the cultural, the historical landscape, and the political, military dynamics in the region. So that was very helpful. And then I was able to apply that as a military officer when I was deployed in Kuwait, in Iraq, in Jordan, and Qatar. And then later on, that helped me posture myself to do Middle East work in government now. So as part of the Biden-Harris administration at the State Department, my focus is mainly on strategic competition, which is a high priority in foreign policy. We're looking at, dynamics involving near-peer competitors. And what does that mainly focus on? Well, President Biden pretty much said when it comes to his administration, soft power is going to be the lead, diplomacy is the lead. So we look at both soft power and hard power, but soft power is the priority. And that's what makes this panel so relevant when it comes to trade and technology, looking into making sure we strengthen that from a position of strength, excuse me, and we modernize and we have competitive systems and norms to ensure that we are effective when it comes to strategic competition. So that's what I do on a daily basis. And one thing I could say is it's a multi-domain approach where you're looking at a lot of different tools when it comes to soft power, mainly in the Middle East, North Africa. So again, it's trade, it's technology, it could be international education. And then we also look at the hard tools too, like defense. So, so that's all I have so far. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next, let's ask Deborah Rosenblum, who's Assistant Secretary of Defense for nuclear, biological and chemical weapons, and I guess other things as well. I have a particular interest in this because that's the kind of stuff that I did spend a lot of my career doing in the State Department, and indeed worked with her office in the Pentagon back in when I was actually doing this, and knew at least one of her predecessors. Now my name, I'm drawing a blank, but it'll come to me. I think you could give us a good overview of where things are, and then we'll get into some more details in a second round. So over to you, Deborah.
Sure, thank you so much, Alex. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with alums from Columbia, a place that's very near and dear to my heart, and really had a tremendous influence in shaping my career. I went to SEPA, as you heard, just like from Asha, and while I was there, I was in the international security policy and then Soviet studies programs. It's now the Russia Harriman Institute. And it was pivotal for me in two ways, the master's degree that I got from SEPA. One, it sparked really what has been a lifelong passion for me in reducing risks from nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. It was a whole world that I had not previously been exposed to. And so I really began to develop my intellectual curiosity about it while I was at SEPA. And the other piece of it that really was very formative for me was that the program that I was in at SEPA was very practically applied. And this was particularly true in the international security policy program. And I understand it's still very much the case. But it really helped me to understand the way in which government looks at these issues and the way in which to be able to take vast amounts of information and data that's coming in at any given time and really assimilate it pretty quickly and understand where some of the key issues are that needs to be grappled with. And so that was very helpful then when I immediately went into government as a career civil servant right after graduating from SEPA, where I was for 13 years. I then left and spent almost 2 decades in private sector, as well as working for a nonprofit, and then was part of the Biden-Harris transition team at the Department of Defense, helping to get ready for the new team to come in, and then was nominated and ultimately confirmed to my current position as the Assistant Secretary for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Weapons. And in the national security area, these issues are important ones for the administration. The president has really worked on and dealt with issues around nuclear weapons really from throughout his life and his long and esteemed career. And so as a result of that, he very much has been focused on, one, fundamentally ensuring that we have a safe, effective, and secure nuclear arsenal to protect ourselves and our allies, but really has emphasized the need to reduce the role that nuclear weapons plays in US defense and foreign policy. And equally importantly, particularly given that we are in COVID and continue to be in COVID, is really the saliency of biological threats to our country as well as our allies, whatever their source may be, infectious and naturally occurring, as we're dealing with now with COVID, and then really looking at ways in which advances in biotechnology and the bioeconomy can be misused either by nation states or by individuals who are part of extremist organizations. So we have a lot of work that's underway to advance that, and happy in the next round of questions to kind of talk through what that means from a policy perspective.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I remember that. Andy Weber was the guy
Yes,
that I knew.
Absolutely, yes.
He was a predecessor of yours, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, 2 people ago. That's exactly right.
Yeah. We'll get back to some of that later, but thank you very much. That's really interesting. Let's go on next to Ed Gresser. Maybe you could follow on with the others. I gather you recently left the government, but you probably have some good perspective there, and maybe can even be freer to speak about what you did now that you're free of the government constraints. Anyway.
All right. Well, as you mentioned, I left government about a month ago to take up a position as vice president of a think tank. My career background is kind of a typical Washington one. I came to Washington after graduating from SIPA, where I was, like Ms. Rosenbaum, at the Harriman Institute. I had 7 years as a congressional staffer. I then went into the second Clinton administration as the speechwriter for the U.S. Trade Representative Office, which is the agency I've just worked at and handles U.S. government's trade negotiating and a lot of the trade enforcement, represents the United States at the WTO. And that came to an end in 2000. I went into think tank work and spent 14 years there, first at Progressive Policy Institute and then with my own kind of mini think tank. Went back into the agency in 2015 as a civil servant, as head of the Trade Policy and Economic Office, which handles USTR's economic research and use of trade data and analytical work. Also manages the interagency trade policy system, a body called the Trade Policy Staff Committee, which is how US executive branch with, depending on how you count, as many as 48 agencies and bureaus and sub-agencies working on trade policy in some capacity or another, to make sure that they're all on the same page. They all know what the US policies and latest steps are in each area, and have had a chance to comment or object to the ideas that USTR has, with a view to making sure that what the government proposes isn't going to cause sort of unintended damage to some other policy area, or that people who are, for example, experts on agricultural health and safety or on border management of border trade flows have a chance to put their expertise into the policy system. Gone back to think tank work now, kind of with the view of hoping to contribute to an assessment of the role of the US in trade in the global economy. The last administration, the Trump administration, was the first really since the Hoover administration to think about trade policy fundamentally in terms of competition and displacement of workers within the United States, as opposed to having that as one element in a kind of general search for a more open and stable global economy. In terms of the lessons I've drawn from my time at Columbia, I would say a couple of things. I was at that time studying Soviet foreign policy. So I think one thing I've drawn from it is a habit of looking for ways to kind of systematically read through analysis and literature on major topics, so that you try to get a look at the problem from a lot of different angles, try to look at different points of view on it. The other thing I've drawn from it was a little bit different. I had, at the time, people who I was studying with and taking courses from, Professor Legbold, Professor Balcony, are really, really good, really challenging, really deep knowledge of the system, Archie Brown and so on. Graduated from the Institute in 1987, and then within 4 years, the country had broken up into 15 pieces. And as much as I admired and continue to admire them, the Harriman Institute professors did not predict that the country was going to break into 15 parts. And that has left me with a kind of feeling that there is a lot of potential for volatility and sudden dramatic change in the world that is very hard to see from outside. Even if you're really deep in the literature, if you've spent a lot of time in the country you're working on the particular problem. And so I think it is important to challenge yourself and ask yourself when you're thinking about some major topic, is there some fundamental instability here? Can this arrangement suddenly slip and shatter? And are we prepared for events of that sort?
Yeah, I think that's very very interesting and quite profound. I mean, as Yogi Berra probably didn't say, it's hard to forecast, especially about the future. But I think we've all seen how most of the time. And I remember when I was when I was at NATO, we would have meetings about what was going to that was in the days when it was still the Soviet Union, what was going to happen to the Soviet Union. And most people said it was probably going to continue more or less like it had been. And, most of the time when you say that, you're right, but sometimes, you're wrong, and then you're really wrong. And I think that's a good lesson to learn. Okay, let's go on to Juan. You've got a rather different portfolio, I guess. So let's hear from you. I'm really interested in finding out what it is specifically that you're doing and how you think it all fits in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. And it's an honor to be here among all these amazing esteemed speakers. And so my current role, I'm in personnel readiness at the Pentagon, focusing on military transition, training with the industry, where service members train up to a year with the industry, and then they would come back into the Department of Defense, re-enlist, and increase our retention goals. In addition to that, I'm also working on employee resource groups. So a lot of this is really talent management. And when it comes to national security, those who set the policies, those who are implementing policies are our people. And they are really the core of national security. And the SecDef has issued a memo in his early days when he first came on board after confirmation. And part of it is focusing on taking care of people at the Pentagon. And so strengthening our talent management and ensuring that those who bear the burden and sacrifice to serve, and also our wonderful civilians who are there in the building every day, are entrusted with the resources and the opportunities to really deliver and thrive at the Pentagon where they work. And part of that really entails, continuous education, career development, training, all that yields extremely beneficial and positive work product for the department and in serving and protecting our democracy. And so from my days at Columbia, I started off as a Navy veteran. I served in the Navy and ended up on Wall Street, going through a New York Stock Exchange Veterans Associate Program, where they really want to help veterans transition. And from there, I was fortunate enough to get accepted into Columbia's nonprofit management program, where I honed in my skills in understanding how veteran service organizations are equipping our service members and veterans with the skill set in order for them to find their second career post-military. And so that lent itself to a lot of learning opportunities and understanding how employers think about hiring talent, managing talent. And because the Department of Defense spends up to $250,000 teaching a civilian to become a service member, those are very valuable skills and training that are highly valuable in the corporate America. And so in my current role, I get to be on the flip side, helping those who are currently serving transition out. And it's really wonderful opportunity, and understanding how much and that our service members and also civilians sacrifice every day to keep us safe. It really is an honor to be serving in the Biden administration. And that's something that Dr. Jill Biden, through joining forces, had pledged. While she was at the Obama administration, she was along with Michelle Obama, First Lady. They are really the originators of building out these various different programs to help service member transition. And now it is an honor to be continuing on this initiative through joining forces, where they're focusing on military spouses and military families. So it really is because of the community and all the great professors and colleagues at Columbia, and also through Columbia's Military Veterans Club, that enable me to get a better understanding of the challenges for both military service members as well as veterans. And so I'm just honored to be here with all of you today and seeing so many wonderful colleagues who are also currently serving in the administration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan. One of the things you just said really struck me as a former Foreign Service officer. If we could have thought that that the State Department would spend something on the order of $250,000 to train people to get into the figure out what it was going to be like in the Foreign Service, we would have thought that was really spectacular. And there's been a lot of talk about that. In fact, the one guy who really looked into that was, of course, the recently departed former Secretary of State Colin Powell. So, but that is very interesting, and we'll maybe hopefully we can get back to some of those other questions later. I noted that Asha talked a bit at her when she was dealing with something that she called strategic competition. And obviously the one country that we're most concerned about competing with these days is China. And it struck me when I was preparing for this, there was a very interesting article, I guess about 10 days ago in the New York Times by David Sanger, where he described efforts by the Biden administration not to call our relationship with China a Cold War, and how people were sort of hunting around for something else to call it. And he went on to note, and I thought this was also very interesting, the differences between our relationship with the Soviet Union from the old days, and obviously several of you have referred to your studying about that, and our relationship with China. I mean, our trade with the Soviet Union in the old days was a pittance. If I remember, I mean, we sent them like frozen chickens and they sent us wheat. Now with China, we've got hundreds of billions of dollars in joint trade back and forth, and it's really a very complex web. So I'm wondering if those who have some connection with this kind of thing could characterize our relationship with China. I'm not asking you to, come up with a catchphrase. I mean, I don't. Pretty hard to what shall I say? Compete with Winston Churchill, who came up with the Cold War. But how would you characterize, in any way you want to, our relationship with China, especially in light of this combination of a close relationship in some respects and an adversarial relationship in others, both in close relationship in trade, efforts to deal with climate change and so on, and yet concerns over both Chinese domestic policy, Chinese policy towards its neighbors in the Pacific, trade policy where we think they haven't played quite fair, and so on. I know different people have different experiences, so let me call on, raise your hand if you want to call. And Deb has already indicated that she would be interested in commenting. So go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, Asha, go ahead, please. I can go after you.
Oh, okay, no problem. Well, when you look at the relationship, it is mixed. There are things that we compete with in terms of certain global issues, and there's also cooperation. So we think of the cooperation piece, like what you kind of said, you have climate changes where we work very closely with them in terms of the Paris Accord, even to a certain extent, the health diplomacy issue with combating COVID-19. And then in my region, you'll have some issues where when it comes to the Yemen war, or even at times with the Iran deal, we work very closely with them as far as trying to reach our consensus in terms of our strategic goals.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are some items that you will characterize as, competition. One major issue we would say is making sure that they uphold to the international rule-based order, which at times that may not necessarily be the case. And so many different issues to fall along with, supporting or espousing the international rule-based order. And then, yes, you do have a category of adversarial. So there is different buckets of it. But the whole point is to make sure that diplomacy helps us maintains our engagement with them, ensuring that we are making sure that they abide by the international rule-based order. So I'll just keep it like that.
Yeah, what I can add to what Asha has said, and I thought that was a really good description, Asha, of the different areas where it's cooperation and competition, from the perspective of both, what the president has put out in terms of the interim national security guidance, and then very much has been amplified by the Secretary of Defense from the Department of Defense's perspective here within the military domain, is that China very much is the pacing threat. And that is not something that is new in the Biden-Harris administration. In the previous administration's national security strategy that was put out in 2018, what was kind of significant and pivotal about that was really putting front and center the reality that China is very much of a pacing threat from a military perspective for the United States. And that is now being continued from the perspective of the Biden-Harris administration in a lot of the work and reviews that are underway. One thing in the area where I work in terms of nuclear and biological, one of the things that I think is important as we do our work going forward is that, it's been publicly discussed now, the dramatic growth and planned growth in the Chinese nuclear arsenal. And there is a lot of work that is going to need to be done, not only from a threat perspective, but also from the perspective that the US, and kind of where we started this discussion with the Soviet Union and Harriman, but with the US and Russia, have had decades of working through nuclear threats and nuclear issues together. And there is not that same body of work that has gone on with the Chinese. So while we'll certainly be looking at it from a threat perspective, there also is a lot of cooperative work, if the Chinese are interested, that will be imperative that we do together to really reduce the risk of any kind of miscalculation, misunderstanding, and avoid any kind of, catastrophic nuclear accident or miscalculation. And, the same is true on the bio side. I mean, China has a very robust biotech, bioeconomy. It is, next to the US, one of the leaders in biotechnology. And there are areas of common purpose that we have in terms of understanding how to best ensure, in a very dynamic industry that is moving faster than government or any kind of international organization like the World Health Organization is going to be able to provide guardrails or any kind of regulation of ways in which cooperatively there can be things like codes of conduct, other parts of the international cooperative architecture that can kind of bound where some of those risks are.
Yeah, I remember, again, back in my day, which now is a little bit old, but still, from what I've heard, one of the problems has, has always been trying to get the Chinese to agree to talk about some of these things. Do you see are there any breakthroughs there? Is there any?
Not yet.
Some movement? Not yet. Okay. No. Yeah, that's, I know that's always been a problem. So anyone else wanted to engage on this one? Ed?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe in the trade area especially?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at trade and economic world, the parallels between relationship with China today and the Cold War era are pretty close to nil. I looked this up, and last year the Cold War came to an end in 1989. We had about $468 billion of imports, and 700 million of that was from the Soviet Union. So one out of about $700 of imports. Last year for China, we had $430 billion of imports out of 2.3 trillion. So about 1/6 of all the imports of the goods of the US are coming from China. We don't have nearly as big export relationship, but it's still pretty big. It's 100 billion plus. So in contrast to that period of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, there are tens of millions of Chinese whose jobs depend on American buyers. There are tens of millions of American families who are buying Chinese goods. There are a lot of American farmers and Boeing and so forth, for which China is really a major customer. Beyond that, obviously there are many thousands of Chinese tourists visiting. We have 370,000 Chinese students in universities, including, I read somewhere Columbia has the fifth most Chinese students, or fifth most relative to total, something like that. So those relationships are quite large. They have probably in some ways a steadying effect on the relationship in the sense that there's a lot to lose from these things fading away. On the other hand, they can also have a inflammatory effect, and that, as I mentioned, and my former employer, Ambassador Tai, has recently given a quite lengthy and detailed speech about the US-China trade relationship. There are a lot of policy stresses on this, subsidization of industries that compete with US industries. There's been a lot of publicity about theft use of American intellectual property and research work, which is kind of debilitating to the US long term. So there are, in the trade relationship, there are both sources of stability and sources of anger and competition or aggravation of problems. And so I guess if we're looking for historical analogies, the Cold War is not at all a good one for this. You might be able to draw from the world before World War I, where you would say that Germany and Russia had very deep economic integration, as was the case today. There were many German companies operating in Russia. There was lots of border trade. On the other hand, there was deep suspicion between the governments and ultimately kind of disastrous effect. So the fact that the relationship with China economically is not at all like the Cold War relationship doesn't point you in any particular direction. You can draw lessons from the past that suggest this is going to be stabilizing and beneficial in kind of strategic sense. But you can also draw lessons from the past saying that those sources of stability aren't all powerful. And you can also look to the relationship today and the types of analysis we see of Chinese policy and say that there are real causes for stress that amplify the kind of suspicion and troubles in the relationship.
Yeah, and Alex, might I add, in the same memo where the SecDef discussed taking care of people, it also outlines our strategic pivot to the Indo-Pacific region. And so from a personnel matter, do we have the right talent with the language skills, with the technology skills? Are we equipping our service members with the most technologically advanced technologies that will enable them to quickly, upskill? So in the areas of cybersecurity, where we're competing with China, where we're defending our own networks and building out a structure for global standards, in areas such as AI, hypersonic, and many of the other areas that requires really a very new set of STEM workforce. That's kind of the things that we're struggling with in terms of understanding how do we meet these pacing challenges, and how do we best utilize our resources and manpower to really make this pivot.
Thanks. Incidentally, this is this. I'm showing now my my age. Pacing. I see several people have used the term. What is this? Pacing challenges. What is it? What is the? That seems like a new invention of jargon. What's the meaning of that? Juan? Deb? I think both of you.
Yeah, so what it's meant to denote is that when we are, as a department and as an administration, and it's because defense is very, very clear that this is not something that's just strictly a DoD thing, but rather a whole of government, but that when we are looking at how well prepared we are for any of the challenges that we've been talking about this evening, that we are pacing ourselves against the challenges that are represented by China and what they're doing internationally, what they're doing with other countries, what they're doing militarily. So it's sort of like, if you think about a pacing car, like if you're a runner and you're trying to keep, speed to your gait, you have the pacing car. And so in many respects, it's sort of against what barometer are we judging how prepared we are as a country with some of the challenges that we face.
I see. Thank you. Well, I learned something in that area too today. Thank you very much. Now here's, I thought I would move to something maybe and ask some questions to the specific panelists before we open it to questions from the audience. So Deb, when I was last in government, and you touched on this a little bit, in the aftermath of 9/11, there was a lot of concern that terrorists might get possession of weapons of mass destruction. And I think especially what people were concerned about, and you sort of alluded to this, was biological weapons, because people said, well, you know, it's hard to get, you know, for a terrorist group to get, you know, nuclear bombs, but it's not that hard for them to get biological weapons. So there was a lot of concern about that. A lot of people worrying about how to prevent the spread of biological agents and the use of biological agents by bad guys. Now, of course, we've seen that biological something can hurt us even without being spread by bad guys, presumably being spread by itself. I'm wondering, what's our view of this generally? Are we still worried about this? Have we made progress? And how does this mesh with our concerns about natural spread of disease and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think we remain very concerned, and we remain, you know, because I talked a little bit about the bioeconomy and really access to things that make up that, biotechnology is becoming so ubiquitous. I don't see how we wouldn't worry about a terrorist element with respect to that. That said, however, it doesn't end there. We absolutely have seen the use of chemical and biological toxins and other things, by state actors, by Russia. I mean, the poisoning in Salisbury and other things. So, what I would say is it's not limited just to the domain of worrying about some rogue element or some extremist element, but rather, really what we're seeing in terms of the use of both chemicals and biological agents by states. And we really have kind of internationally blown through the norms against these. And it's quite disturbing. And it is not evident or obvious how we can easily kind of reinstitute those norms. And, where you previously had agreement, kind of against the horror of the use of chemical weapons, in war, we've seen it repeatedly in Asha's area, in Syria and in other areas. So, it is something that is a real concern. And regulation is not the answer to it. I mean, it's all just moving far too quickly. And so it does represent a real challenge. And, I think that one of the important areas that the Biden-Harris administration has really been very focused on is talking about, it's not about necessarily the source of where it's come from, whether it's naturally occurring or an accident in a laboratory, or that someone or some country has willfully introduced a highly virulent pathogen, but that we need just to be much better prepared. And, we've seen, for a wide variety of reasons, the number of highly infectious disease, greatly increasing with, infringement between, zoo animals and humans and where they live and all of that. And then also, as I mentioned, the use by state actors. So it's an area that is of great concern and is certainly a priority within the Biden-Harris administration, particularly in light of COVID, but not limited just to COVID.
Thanks a lot. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
I'll just make one point. In my bureau, we have a team that's really engaged in nuclear nonproliferation, and they've been they've been really, really working hard since day one. Like Special Envoy Rob Malley, who works on the Iran deal. He has a great team that goes out there all the time to meet and discuss negotiations. And then we also have Undersecretary on nuclear weapons, weapons, chemical weapons, Bonnie Jenkins, who has, excuse me if I mess up her title, who also has oversight and helps with support in that effort. So this has been just absolutely ongoing and a priority for the administration.
Well, that sort of steals my thunder a little bit, because that was going to be sort of the next question I was going to ask. But I was wondering if you can shed any light on it. Obviously, it's very difficult, and you probably couldn't tell us even if you knew. But is there anything that seems to indicate that maybe we and the Iranians could get somewhere on this? Could get back to this somewhere, somehow?
To be determined. When you're doing negotiations, there's this thing called strategic patience. Most Americans, everyone wants results now, so it takes time. Before this administration came in, this agreement, or excuse me, the negotiations were completely not even going on. We resumed them, so we have some time to go, but to be continued. And again, strategic patience, because it is a rigorous process as far as meeting with Iran, but we'll see. But good thing is that it's going on than not having it at all. We need to make sure diplomacy is priority. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm wondering, I guess maybe we talked about this some already, but I'm wondering whether Ed has anything more to say about what we can do more in the trade area impacting with China, or with the other issues in the trade field that you think is particularly salient, and something that the administration either is focusing on or should focus on more?
Well, with respect to China, I feel like your policy is in good hands. Ambassador Tai, Secretary Yellen, Raimondo is a very, very good economic team, very experienced in lots of different ways, very good relationships with Congress. Secretary of Commerce has a state government background, so have a very good sort of sense on the ground. How are people feeling about these policies? We have a good macro team that will look at the stability of overall relationships on the financial side. I would say that looking back at the last administration, this experiment with use of tariffs to try to compel policy change from China, and they identified a number of quite important problems in the course of launching this investigation, which led me into this collision with China. Cyber theft, coerced technology transfer, these are very important concerns and major US interests. They wound up, however, negotiating an agreement that was very, very heavy on export targets and the balance of trade, and was, in my opinion, not very well thought through, in that there were targets of buying more agricultural products and more airplanes, and China had been buying them before and would have continued to buy them regardless. There were some targets that were not reachable in any realistic sense. And in the course of doing this, a lot of the more sort of abstract but really important policy issues were kind of lost and left behind.
Sort of got lost,
And I think it would be very useful for us to step back and think again about those core issues. And I do commend Ambassador Tai's speech a couple of weeks ago at CSIS as a way of looking at what does the administration think are the major challenges in the China relationship. And I think she did quite a good job of setting out a lot of these things. And question of how to settle those problems is a very difficult one. We have the experience of the Trump administration. Tariffs, they did get China to agree to some things, but the things they agreed to weren't, in my opinion, really core issues. And the use of tariffs left the U.S. somewhat worse off, and China somewhat worse off, and the WTO system, damaged, not insignificantly. So I think that is the area, having identified a real set of problems, what are the tools that are best suited to get you to solutions or toward solutions to these problems, and what tools will do harm to you as well as to put pressure on China. More fundamentally, I think there's a lot of question about the pillars of American trade policy right now. You could really date U.S. trade policy in the modern sense to New Deal and Roosevelt administration, where they decided that we should no longer do trade policy through domestic tariff legislation, and instead should be negotiating with foreign countries to create a more open world economy. The last administration has kind of rejected that point of view. Where do we go from here? Should we go back to where we were before, or is there a third option? What does the China experience say for our, for the traditional way the U.S. pursued trade policy? Are there ways to shore up U.S. relationships with European Union, with Japan, with other major allies? So I think those are the types of questions that, they're quite big ones about what the U.S. strategy should be. And it makes it kind of a nice and exciting time to be in this field. It's not like the core things are laid down for you and the question is, what's the next iteration of them? It's, what best serves the needs of the American public and its workers, what best serves the long-term growth interests of the United States, what serves the best interest of stability of global economy and politics. And so that I think ideas on those topics are quite welcome right now.
Thanks a lot. That was I thought that was very interesting and something that I hadn't quite thought of, but you do paint an interesting picture and a question of where we are going from here, and that it could be really a kind of turning point. Thanks a lot. Juan, I haven't asked you anything terribly specific, but one thing that I was thinking of was, is there a way in which our, ending our longest war in American history has an impact on the kind of things that you worry about, whether it's readiness or what happens to people when they leave the service or when they come into the service and so on. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, and then I'd like to turn to questions from the audience.
Thank you, Alex. In terms of readiness, it is something that the department cares about a lot. We want to make sure our personnel are well equipped, and the impact overseas, as we saw, there are equipment and contractors and additional manpower that will require during the process of evacuation. And so that certainly had its own impact. But overall, considering the number of service members that were in country versus during the peak, when we were fully engaged in the region, over 100,000, the number, I would say, that we provided during evacuation is significantly smaller. And so throughout the years, the overall intention from the beginning of drawdown during the Obama administration was to ensure that those coming home have the support and services that they need in order to, make their pivot to their next career and become also, contributing members of society as they take off their uniform. And so to your point, the ramifications of this drawdown and now what we've seen, evacuation has certainly impacted this community, whether service members or veterans community. But we're seeing a completely different new wave of support, especially in the veterans community, coming to the aid of refugees who have been welcomed to our country, over 100,000 plus. And we see currently the Operation Allies Welcome that is ongoing as we equipped refugees with the support that they require. Service members as well as veterans are coalescing around this community and providing support to ensure that they get integrated, just as those who have served overseas with those interpreters with SIVs and their families have come home. And so that is a very welcoming support that we see. And again, it is something that I would say ending a war is never easy. And as you know, our president has certainly taken the leadership role in ensuring that we don't burden the next administration with the same issues. So with that said, it is a whole nation effort to ensure that those refugees are welcome and accepted. And that's something that we all stand very proud in support of.
Okay, let me turn to some of the questions from the people in attendance. Okay, Gus Ordonez says, from a priority perspective, how is China seen by the Biden administration? I think these are supposed to be which are the most, are the highest priority things. Economics and trade, defense threats, stability in Taiwan. Is there anybody who'd like to answer?
I'll take a small swing at it.
Yeah.
I feel like to that question, the answer is something like yes, and climate change. China is obviously a very large country. So depending how you measure it, world's largest economy or slightly second to the United States or the European Union. It has powerful military and is involved in with the US in several frozen conflicts and potential conflicts. And the administration, obviously and rightly, has a very high priority on all of these things. There's an interesting article in the Washington Post today about a bit of tension between those who are focused on climate change versus those who are focused on security. I don't think right now I see a hierarchy. I think the administration is confronted with a situation in which its goals in each of these things can be seen as really top tier national security or economic security or global needs, and probably can't easily be sacrificed to one another, but are sometimes in tension or competition with one another. It's a very difficult situation.
I like to add on another one, health diplomacy too. That's a priority as well. And, we look at it as competition and cooperation. So big deal,
Yeah.
especially, we're engaged with a health crisis.
Yeah, and
Good point.
one
Yeah.
thing
Deb?
I would also add that is a priority that will absolutely involve China is resuming the focus on non-proliferation, really trying to keep weapons of mass destruction out of the hands of countries that currently don't have it, and the integrity of the non-proliferation treaty that commits those states that have nuclear weapons to disarm in exchange for, reduction in the proliferation, as Alex well knows. And China will play a very important role in that area as well. So I think this goes back kind of to where we started this conversation as it related to China, that there are areas where cooperation will be essential in terms of mutual interests, but the reality that the competition, and I understand what David Sanger said, but the reality is that, there will be a huge amount of challenges that are being presented by China to the United States and its interests.
Yes, it's certainly, I don't have a lot of, I have a lot of sympathy for people who are trying to sort of work this out and figure out how to cooperate with the Chinese, for example, on non-proliferation or on climate change or on, health issues, and yet at the same time deal with them and at least a competitive, if not adversarial, relationship in certain strategic areas. Let's see, we also Gus Ordonez again says, Russia's expansion moves have threatened the stability of the European Union. This has a major impact on, well, he says US-EU defense treaties. We don't have defense treaties with the EU, but with European countries. What is the response of the Biden administration to this? Is there anyone who'd like to take a chance at that one? Anyone?
Well, I guess I don't have a lot of insight into the Russia side of this, but I do think the administration feels very strongly that the last administration did some substantial damage to major strategic U.S. relationships, including with European allies, including with Korea, including with Canada and Mexico, and wants very much to shore up and re-energize these relationships. Mm-hmm. And if it's successful in doing so, that will have a lot of benefit in whatever we're trying to do with Russia and probably with China as well. But the alliances are really a multiplier of power, and we'll get a lot more achieved in any of these areas if we have relationships of trust and confidence with these allies, and a lot less if we don't.
Yeah, Ed, I thought you did a great job articulating that. It is absolutely a priority of the Biden-Harris administration to be working with and through its allies, and for all the reasons that you very ably articulated. And I'm absolutely not a Europe expert. I was at NATO recently for some meetings and some consultations. And that was something that was very much front and center, the importance of, consulting and really understanding where the allies are on a whole host and range of issues. And that's also true with the EU as well. And so, and then it's certainly the case in Asia in terms of South Korea and Japan. And so, I think that we can expect to see this remaining a priority for the administration, and one that they are clear to articulate. And you're seeing the president making a number of trips really as part of an outreach to the allies on their territory and in their areas, so that it's not just, okay, come to the US if you want to speak with us about something, but rather, senior level officials going out in country and in various regions to conduct these consultations.
There's been a good deal of talk or speculation or whatever about Allied reaction to the US, what some people claimed was a sort of precipitous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and that this would somehow interfere with our attempts to reestablish good relations with the Allies. Have you seen that evidence one way or the other that it has had an effect or not had effect? Deb, I think in particular in your travels.
So I did not work the Afghanistan issue and don't, but I can say that, you know, notwithstanding what some of the public comments are, there has been a great deal of engagement, both prior to and then throughout the withdrawal and the NEO from Afghanistan. And I think, at least from what I witnessed and heard, the NATO allies know that.
What about, I don't know, Ed, would you have is there anything that you might say? I mean, it is in some ways a trade issue. The US, UK, Australian deal on nuclear submarines, has that, you know, and the French reaction to that do you think that's a serious concern? Or some people say it had a lot more to do with the French election, although obviously the French are unhappy that they lost this big contract. Any thoughts on that?
I'm not aware that series of events has had a real major impact on the trade policy things that we're doing. There was a fairly splashy launch of a project called US-EU Trade and Technology Council last month in Pittsburgh, where US and EU set out a list of 10 things that they wanted to work on. Some of them, you know, US-EU trade opportunities, some of them, you know, cyber issues, some of them on trying to eliminate forced labor from international supply chains and so forth. So in a sense of the reconnection with the EU, I don't think there's been backlash. There is a long record of some degree of US-French competition for defense exports. I think French feel quite justifiably proud of their defense industry, view it as economically important and strategically important. I think they're obviously upset to lose a big contract, but that's part of life. And I think the Europeans will, you know, by and large, they recognize it's part of life. They recognize the French are mad, but, you know, I don't think this is a fundamental problem for US-EU or US allied trade policy making.
Speaking of that, as long as I brought it up, but maybe I'm going to ask Deb what might be a difficult question. Any thought about, I mean, I remember, again, back in my day, that we were very concerned about any kind of expanded possession of reactors using high enriched uranium. And that, of course, is what we use in our nuclear submarines. Is your office at all concerned about this, or you think the safeguards are strong enough that we don't have to worry?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely the right question. So, you know, we are not concerned from the perspective of the safeguards, as you mentioned. You know, I think what it does, however, is it does not in terms of the AUKUS deal on the submarine, but you raise a broader question around, you know, continued concern around the potential for loose nuclear material, and ensuring that it's adequately safeguarded and secured kind of throughout the world. And that is something that we saw certainly a great deal of work being done, particularly under the Obama administration. During that time frame, really not a focus that I'm aware of during the Trump administration, the previous administration, but is something that the Biden-Harris administration is taking a very strong look at, particularly from a homeland perspective, and whether there are any risks there as well.
Oh, I see. Thanks a lot. That's an interesting answer. Before we conclude, we've got about another 10, 15 minutes or so. originally, this meeting, this panel was billed as something about, that would be connected to some extent with, sort of how to get a job in the Biden administration. There have been some questions from the audience on this subject. I know we decided really to change the focus of it, but if anybody would like to engage in that question in any way, I think some of the people in attendance would be interested. Is there anyone who would like to try and take a crack at a question along those lines?
Yeah, sure. So that's part of, so sort of disclosing that I worked volunteer specifically on the Biden campaign and then volunteer during transition in part of the volunteer interviewing corps. So the administration has put forth specifically a website to encourage applicants coming from diverse backgrounds to apply. And so that is public information, and certainly it's on the White House website. And so for those who are interested, of course, that's the best route to submit your application and to highlight the skill sets and your background and identifying the areas where you see yourself fit. And understanding that this was really originally designed to talk about our path from Columbia to the Biden administration as a discussion point. A lot of this is really, as others have alluded to during the introductory remarks, that we owe a lot to the Columbia community, and because of our professors, our colleagues, our alumni community, many of us who have had the pleasure to work alongside so many talented individuals really gain those opportunities because of the network. And so with that said, I certainly welcome the other panelists to share some of their thoughts as well. But I am certainly available if anybody would love to chat and connect after the fact. It is a opportunity of a lifetime to serve in the administration. So those who have done so before, I'm sure that they have a lot of stories to tell as well. So I'm happy to share the link after the session.
Some of us served in many administrations, yeah.
So one thing that I would add, and this has not just exclusively if someone wants to serve in the Biden-Harris administration, but use the Columbia network. I mean, we talked about it when we first started about what we got out of, the various programs that each of us have been involved with. But one of the things that I was remiss in not mentioning, and so I'm glad we've come back to this point, is how the Columbia network has been invaluable to me, both in terms of, dear professional colleagues all throughout my career, but then also people from Columbia who've helped to mentor me, who've helped to, come up with different ideas at key pivotal points in my career of different choices to make. So, don't be shy. All of us up here, whether we say it or not, have been greatly helped by the Columbia network, and we need to give back. And so definitely make sure you look for alumni in different areas that you might be interested in potentially working.
Thanks.
Yes,
Anyone else?
Yes, I totally agree with Deb and Juan. Just want to elaborate on Deb's point. Use the Columbia network. I'm so excited to serve under a Secretary of State that went to Columbia, and then our head coordinator at the White House on Middle East policy is a Columbia, part of the alumni too as well. Then our undersecretary on economics, Jose Fernandez, he is a alumni as well. And then the National Security Advisor to the VP, Kamal Harris. She is a SEPA alumni, I think going back to 84. So this network is just a wild card. Oh, and I like to add on too, we had the Deputy National Security Advisor on cyber. And you know, this is Cyber Month. It's also part of the network as well. So please reach out. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Asha. Well, that was very interesting. I appreciate all your comments, and we weren't planning to do a lot of this, but I think we did, you know, enough, you know, what was appropriate. Anyone have any sort of, maybe those were kind of concluding remarks, but if anybody has any further concluding remarks, I think this has been a very lively and interesting discussion, but if anyone has some sort of overall roundup things they'd like to say, I'd be certainly welcome to that. We've got about 5 minutes left before we have to close down the Zoom, but if they do, I'd welcome them.
Just thank you for bringing us all together. It's been great. It's been a privilege, and very nice to meet you and Asha and Juan and Deb as well.
Well, I think it was Lobsang and Juan that
And Lobsang, yes.
Arrange this. I just with my many years in the government, I said, well, I could probably talk about this a little bit. So anyway,
Well, thanks for your moderation.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody for putting in the time and the effort. Really appreciate that. Trying to see, Miyako, do you have any concluding remarks?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much. I just wanted to jump in and say that we did record the event, and we will be uploading it onto our YouTube page tomorrow. So you can take a look if you want to send it around to other alumni or whatever it may be. We had some great information there at the end, really throughout the whole thing, but especially I think at the end for those who might be interested in government on how to reach out and network. So thank you all again so much.
Okay,
And
thanks
thank
a lot.
you so much for coordinating and organizing.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks to everybody. Good night and
Good night.
good luck.
Good
as
night.
Elmore used to say.